believe that the historical circumstances that led to the emergence of African Americans, the fact that we came out of slavery, that we came from a situation of being dispossessed, disenfranchised, and intentionally cut off from our past, has led to this real acute interest in an African identity. And it's not to deny that there are other populations that have contributed to our existence, specifically Western European and Native American, especially Southeastern Native American groups. But for the most part, the European lineages and the Native American lineages have not been all that receptive to African Americans as well. So, it's much easier to want to claim a lineage that is willing to embrace you. With the genetics will take us back farther than the genealogy. Why? Because the genetics doesn't change as rapidly, and the genetic information in the genome holds a memory that is deeper, that may be 150,000 years old. Well, nobody has a genealogy that they can recall that goes back that far, although of course it does go back that far, but our own intellectual powers and are not great enough to remind us who was that ancestor 150,000 years ago. But the genes can say something about that ancestor. So that would be the difference. There are different time scales for the genealogical ancestry versus the genomic ancestry, totally different databases. But one of the things that we're exploring now is how to combine these databases in ways that are meaningful, so that we can say to people, well, when we look at your mitochondrial DNA, it takes us back 70,000 years. And probably, it emerged in this region of Africa as opposed to this region, but the women moved, and then we see that now it's spread all over Africa. Or maybe there are certain hot spots where you find high frequencies of your particular mitochondrial DNA. And then if we have the Y chromosome from that same individual, it might tell a totally different story. So what we want people to begin to understand is that we are a mosaic of inputs from different people at different times, and our story, each of our stories, is in fact the human story. And I think if we move in that direction, then we can get people to begin to reconcile these multiple and often seemingly contradictory areas of information about their ancestry. In reconstructing one's past, the DNA can be a helpful adjunct, but by itself, no, it's not enough. It has to be coupled with historical information, with ethnographic information, with geographical information. And when you start to put all of this together, then you at least begin to get a fuzzy picture of what may have gone on. I like to think that, our potentials increase as our database expands and so forth, our potential to reconstruct. But the truth is that sometimes you can't put Humpty Dumpty all together again, that there are always going to be some gaps. And so not every African American is going to be able to reconstruct all the way back to Africa and to a particular village. We have to almost experience the Alex Haley phenomena tangentially, because for many of us, it's not going to be a possibility. We can only, at best, make some very general statements. It's actually not a loss. I think that that's the first thing. yes, you can't completely reconstruct to a particular tribe or a particular cultural group, but we can give them some possibilities. And from those possibilities, they can examine other aspects of their genealogies and choose whichever group they want to be a part of, or whichever set of groups they want to be a part of. And that's okay, because that process has been going on in Africa and throughout the world for thousands of years, you know? I mean, ethnicity is not something that's hardwired into your genes. It's a cultural attribute that you take on. If they receive genetic results for any of the common African mitochondrial DNA haplotypes, and the results suggested that they belong to one ethnic group, I would really warn them about investing too much in that notion, because we're finding that these haplotypes are broadly distributed. And you can find identical matches on the East Coast, the West Coast, in North Africa, in South Africa, and they're all the same identical hypervariable region 1 of the mitochondrial DNA. So that doesn't mean that the person can't feel an affinity to whatever group, you know, he or she has been assigned. But ethnic identity is not genetic identity. And we need to remember that, you know, the ties that bind us are not solely genetic. You know, we have ties that bind us to Western Europe that are cultural. I have ties that bind me to Arabia that are religious. You know, I mean, so there are many ways to link to humanity, and I think all of those linkages are valuable. We don't want to overemphasize a genetic linkage, which in fact could change as the database expands. DNA analysis of the mitochondrial DNA and the Y chromosome can give you a rough idea of how far back in time you may have shared an ancestor with that particular individual, but it can't tell you exactly. And the reason for that is that we can't get this kind of immediate time depth unless we include more than just genetic information. So when you take the example, for example, of the relatives of Sally Hemings, and if they have a DNA sequence, that a Y chromosome sequence that's very similar to a type of DNA found in Europe. Now, we know that they must have had an ancestor, they must have shared an ancestor in common with that group that now shows that same sequence in Europe. But it's only through the historical information that it allows us to put our finger on Thomas Jefferson or someone from his lineage. So that brings it much more into the contemporary times. But the Y chromosome data really takes us back farther in time to a shared ancestor. And then he becomes a shared ancestor for the offspring, the male offspring of Sally Hemings, as well as the male offspring of Thomas Jefferson. So when you supplement the genetic information with historical information, then you're able to put a more convincing time frame on some of these events, some of these genetic events.